Okay, so this is part 2 of lecture 4. In part 1, we talked about what use cases are and why we use them. And we also talked about actors. So let's talk about how we identify the use cases in a system. Well, here are some more questions similar to the ones that helped us identify actors, but now these are focused on use cases. So we can, if we've identified some actors, then we can go through each actor and ask what are the different functions that each one will want for the system, what do they do with the system. We can think about all the information that the system might store, and then think about who might want to access that information. Um, and try to also think about support and maintenance use cases for the system. And you can cross-check with the requirements document if you have one, or some list of requirements, and make sure that your use cases cover all of those. Remember that a use case needs to talk about the what, not the how, and use terminology that's not geek speak, so to speak, that's more of audience friendly, meaning that people who are not technical can understand it. So we want to, when we're describing a use case, we want to make sure that we talk about how the use case starts and ends, so from beginning to end, from the initiation to achieving the goal. And then in between, we talk about the interactions between the use case and actors. What kind of data they exchange, what's needed from the user, what the system does in response to what the user just did, etc. And remember that we always have a basic flow. That is the happy day scenario where everything goes as expected and there are no errors, and it's pretty much the most common way of achieving that goal. And then we also may have alternative flows where it's an alternate way of achieving the same goal, and or exception flows when something goes wrong. So let's now look at an example use case. And this is pretty much the one I was using as an example earlier of buy a product for some kind of system, e-commerce system like Amazon or something similar. So we have a basic flow, and this is what I described before, where the customer browses the catalog, selects their items, fills in information, what the system does in response. So notice that we have customer as the primary actor here because the customer is the one that initiates the use case. And we have for each step, and it's a sequence of numbered steps, for each step, it's a clear, simple statement. It just shows who's engaged in the step and what's involved. It shows the intent of the actor. It shows data exchange between the actor and the system, or actors and system. And notice that it's at a certain level of abstraction, where it doesn't include UI details or very fine-grained details. Like it doesn't say that exactly how they select items to buy, like they find the item, they click on it, they choose add to cart, or it doesn't say they fill in shipping information. They first click on the address field and they enter their address. Then they click on the city field and they choose a city. So we want to work at a certain level of abstraction where we're not going into too much irrelevant detail. But what's shown here is a pretty appropriate level of abstraction. So we have the basic flow, and then we have the alternative flow. And this is when a customer, it shows the condition here when this alternative flow is executed, that the customer is a repeat customer. And in that case, it goes in at step, this says 3A, so it starts in here at step 3, meaning instead of the customer filling in the shipping information, instead of that, it does these things. The system displays the saved information, the customer may accept or override those, and then returns to the basic flow in step 6. So it skips over steps 4 and 5, but the end goal is still accomplished, which is why this is an alternative flow. And so it's not shown here, but we may have an exception flow where, like I mentioned earlier, there's an exception here in step 5 where the customer fills in their credit card information and the credit card is declined. And that would end in an exception flow where the goal is not achieved, the product is not bought. Practically, how we build a use case is this is a good set of sequential steps to do that. First of all, we want to name the use case, and it should be a very concise name, it should describe the functionality in just a few words, like buy a product, um, not adding too much detail, like adding a product to the cart and putting in info and checking out. It should just be something short and concise in just a few words. And it should also be an active verb, like buy a product, and not something like product purchase, because that would be more of a noun and less of an active term. When we build a use case, we want to name it, and then we want to describe the basic flow. And then if we have alternative exception flows, we work from there. Remember that not all use cases will have alternative and or exception flows, but they will all have a basic flow. Use cases can be as simple as a paragraph of informal text or as complex as something like this. These very complex use case templates exist, and it's just a form that remind developers what information to include. This is one specific template. There are ones that are simpler than this, but what you use and how formal or informal your use case is specified just depends on the formality level of the project or the product. So this is the first part of this use case template, and then this is continued. So you see that there you can make a use case very, very detailed. Now it's your turn again to brainstorm some use cases for the to-do list app. Now that we've talked about some tips for finding use cases, for building use cases, apply that to the to-do list app that we use as an example, and write these down. Again, bring them to class on Thursday because we'll be talking about what you've come up with.